All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, one of the consistent themes of this show is that there's a certain group of political, financial, and media elites whose ideology reflects a small fraction of Americans, an ideology of hawkish imperialism, market fundamentalism, and top-down rule by supposedly enlightened technocrats. Now, by their small numbers, they should be a group in the ideological wilderness shunned by both of the major parties, but of course they're not. Quite the contrary. This group is outrageously influential and effectively runs both the parties in bipartisan comedy while casually crushing the working class. Who do I mean? Well, people like this guy.
I'm sure there are Republicans and independents who couldn't imagine crossing over to support a Democrat. They fear Joe may turn sharp left and leave them behind. I don't believe that because I know the measure of the man. It's reasonable, faithful, respectful. And you know, no one pushes Joe around.
John Kasich, the Republican former Ohio governor and longtime member of Congress, is one of many well-connected Bushies who have migrated from the Republican Party over to Biden land. Now, he doesn't call himself a Democrat yet, but it doesn't matter because his viewpoint is much more influential in the Democratic Party than millions of people who do call themselves Democrats and vote in Democratic primaries. And so it was absolutely perfect that on the first day of the DNC, John Kasich would take it upon himself to explain to everyone what it means to be a Democrat. In comments to BuzzFeed, he said, "I think both parties have to have new ideas, and I think this country is moderate. People on the extreme, whether they're on the left or on the right, they get outsized publicity that tends to define their party. You know, I listen to people all the time make these statements, and because AOC gets outsized publicity doesn't mean she represents the Democratic Party. She's just a part, just some member of it, and it's on both sides, whether it's the Republicans or whether it's the Democrats." So let's be clear here. John Kasich uses the language of a moderate, but he is not, in fact, a moderate. He's an extremist, wildly outside of the American mainstream. He's an extremist on the budget, pushing Social Security cuts and privatization. He's an extremist in his union busting, and he's an extremist on abortion, having signed into law one of the most restrictive anti-abortion laws in the entire country. Now, you might think that the Democratic Party would be dismayed to see their invited speaker trashing one of the party's biggest rising stars. But you would be wrong, because the very act of inviting and featuring people like John Kasich is precisely intended to trash the wing of the party which AOC represents. After all, as we revealed here yesterday, while nearly 2/3 of voters said they would like to hear AOC speak at the DNC, nearly 2/3 of voters said they would not like to hear John Kasich speak. So it's kind of hard to see what you're really getting here, electorally speaking. And of course, it's not just Kasich. Oh no, night one featured a quartet of GOP luminaries, Christine Todd Whitman, former Congresswoman Susan Molinari, and Meg Whitman, and all, of course, joined John Kasich. As Steve Kornacki pointed out on Twitter, they are literally the GOP in 1996. Congratulations, Democrats. But for the Democratic Party apparatchiks, Kasich and co. represent an imagined voter that they have long coveted and slobbered over. They all represent a step forward on their multi-decade project to move the party from its working-class populist roots to a more upscale and affluent coalition of what they view as the educated and the cultured. I mean, look, I don't want to give these people too much credit because I literally do not think a single voter will be persuaded by John Kasich making the pitch for Biden-Harris. But the Dem Party elites view this brand of never-Trumper as vital to their project of party gentrification. Remember last cycle when Ed Rendell memorably told the New York Times that for every blue-collar Democrat Trump picks up, he will lose to Hillary 2 socially moderate Republicans and independents in the suburbs. Rendell and the entire party, they were good with that. They were happy with it. They were actually aiming for it. The more of these white college-educated moderates that they get, the less they have to worry about those damn kids and workers not wanting to live their entire lives in poverty one accident away from financial oblivion. Hillary went on to explain post-election that she had really won because I won the places that represent 2/3 of America's gross domestic product. So I won the places that are optimistic, diverse, dynamic, moving forward. Never mind, of course, that Democrats are supposed to be the party of the oppressed and the downtrodden. The real project these days is to be the party of the people who are doing A-OK. Of course, the electoral math didn't work out last time around, but it's not like that was a problem for anyone. Hillary's got a speaking slot at the DNC to tell us all to Pokemon go to the polls, and Obama got another shot at picking his successor. The consultants have all still been able to find lots of work. The pod bros still get to tell us how amazingly progressive Biden is. And now here's the counter argument. Well, we've got to beat Trump, and so Kasich's great because you got to get everyone you can on board. But here's the thing. A lineup of Kasich, Bloomberg, and Bill Clinton, which snubs AOC and the progressive insurgents who have ridden this summer's protest wave to shock victories, that is not, in fact, a lineup that's aimed at getting everyone on board, and it is certainly not a lineup that is aimed at winning. It's a lineup that is aimed at status quo preservation because they can't tolerate even the shred of implied power and unpredictability which would come from AOC or Cori Bush or Rashida Tlaib having an actual chance to make their case. No, it's all very clarifying, very blatant. Who they want in the party, who they don't, who they believe will help them maintain their power for years, decades to come, and who they worry may actually have a few principles and be willing to fight for them. So get ready for the Biden era of Nicole Wallace on MSNBC, Jennifer Rubin over at the Post, maybe John Kasich will get a gig as OMB director with his vast experience of deficit hawkery. Lincoln Project guys, they'll be raking it in. But don't worry, because although Democrats threw all that unity talk out the window the minute it no longer served them, and although Dems did nothing to actually appeal to young and working class voters, they'll still be happy to blame those same voters if they lose. They'll bring on a post-election panel of Rahm Emanuel, Neera Tanden, and John Kasich to tell us how the left screwed it all up again. And Sagar, it is so blatant, especially last night, right, to have all these Republicans and to so clearly snub people like AOC and that whole wing of the party. It really does demonstrate who they want in the coalition and how they want to try to win. And actually winning isn't even the primary goal. The primary goal is to make sure that this insurgent movement never gets any life.
You know, it's amazing, right? That right ahead of his speech, the day of the speech, he's talking to BuzzFeed and he's trashing a member of that party. And I
who's supposedly a rising star, right?
And I glibly tweeted this. I was like, it's amazing that John Kasich gets to define progressivism for Democrats and conservatism for Republicans. He's saving conservatives by backing Biden, and he's saving Democrats from progressives by also supporting him. It's like, oh, wow, this man is a true prophet, savior of our times. He gets to define everything for us.
But he does. That's the problem is he does.
Yes, and the media is like, yes, John, tell us what's going on with conservatives. And then they're like, yeah, John, tell us what's wrong with AOC. Who is this man? Does he have any actual supporters in the United States? No, he actually doesn't. Dig down deeper, and you see also that perfectly encapsulates the bipartisan consensus in America of Republican and Democrat for what they call the media. It's the guy who just embodies corporatism that is ultimately bipartisan. And that's why he's supporting Joe Biden, I think, which is that Trump was always a threat to John Kasich and his hold over the party because it was at least a theoretical threat to deficits and to so much of what they hold dear. That's what he cares about the most. He wants to return it to that dynamic. So people should be very wary of that, because when I say that Biden wants to return America to 2012, you be like, oh, but he wants to do this. The people who really are invested in that are people like Mitt Romney, are people like John Kasich, people like Paul Ryan, who were very powerful then. That's why they're supporting Joe Biden.
And their ideology is profoundly unpopular.
Oh, of course.
And I think
it rejected the ballot box 3 separate times.
And I do this sometimes too. I'll refer to them as like centrists or moderates. But I think it's really important to make the point that their views are wildly outside of the mainstream of America, which is why they never make a case for their views. They never actually make an affirmative case for what they stand for, what policies they would put in place, what they would do with the budget. Kasich has been pushing like Social Security privatization, something literally
20 years.
No one wants, right? But they don't make a case for that. They make a case against Trump. Trump has given them plenty to work with there. And so that's why you end up with such a theater that is substanceless at this convention, but also a party that is completely lacking in substance as well, because you never want to actually admit what you're going to do unless you're with your donors when you're like, don't worry, nothing's fundamentally going to change. The best you can do is say, not just Donald Trump, but everybody who voted for them is evil and awful, and that's the real threat, and that's the only thing that we can focus on or talk about, because they don't want want to affirmatively make the case for their ideology because it's not supported.
Yeah, I think that's really right.
All right, Sagar, looking for your radar. That's next.